Before I say another word, I need to ask you for something. If you are the kind of person who believes a mother's love can hold a secret for 50 years, hit that like button right now, because you are going to need it by the time this story is over. And subscribe to this channel, because I have many more stories like this one. Stories that are true. Stories that come from a life lived slow and plain and full of things the world outside my fences never sees. Right now, before you forget, type in the comments where you are watching this from. I want to know. I have never left the county I was born in, not once in 79 years, and it warms this old heart of mine more than you know to think that somebody in a place I will never see is sitting there listening to an old Amish woman tell you about the one letter her mother hid from her until the day she died. So go on, comment your city, your country, wherever you are, and then settle in, because what I am about to tell you took me 79 years to understand, and I still do not know if I understand all of it now. My name does not matter so much as what happened to me. But I will tell you, it is Miriam. I was born in a farmhouse in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in a room with no electric light, delivered by a midwife named Sadie Lapp, who smelled of lavender soap and kept her sleeves rolled to the elbow. I have lived my whole life among the Amish, in the faith my mother raised me in the ways my grandmother's grandmother knew before her. I have driven a buggy more miles than I could ever count. I have canned more tomatoes than there are stars over our back pasture on a clear November night. I raised 6 children of my own, buried a husband I loved without ever once telling him so out loud, because that is not our way, though he knew it all the same, the way you know the sun is warm without needing to be told. And for 79 years, I believed I understood exactly who I was and exactly where I came from. I was wrong. Or rather, I was only half right, and the other half of the truth sat folded inside a Bible in a cedar chest in my mother's bedroom for longer than I have been alive to imagine it there. I want to tell you about my mother first, because you cannot understand the letter without understanding her. And I spent 79 years not truly understanding her at all. My mother's name was Rebecca. She was a small woman, narrow through the shoulders, with hands that never seemed to stop moving even when she was sitting still in church. She could piece a quilt top faster than any woman in our district, and she never once, in my whole life, told anyone how she felt about anything. Not about the weather. Not about a sermon, not about the deaths of her own parents. She would simply nod and go on with her hands moving, and that was how you knew a thing had touched her, because her hands moved a little faster and a little harder, like she was trying to press the feeling down into the fabric instead of letting it come up into her face. People in our community would say, "Rebecca is a quiet woman," and they would say it with respect. The way you might say a hen is a good layer or a horse is sound in the leg. It was a compliment among us, to be quiet, to keep your sorrows between yourself and God, and not go spilling them onto other people's Sunday dinners. But even as a small girl, I sensed that my mother's quiet was not the ordinary quiet of a plain, contented woman. There was a kind of held breath in it. Do you know what I mean? Like a held breath that goes on so long you forget you are even holding it, until one day, decades later, somebody lets it out for you, and you realize you had been suffocating the whole time and did not know it, because it had become the only way you knew how to breathe. I remember, as a very small girl, watching my mother stand at the kitchen window some evenings after the supper dishes were done and the younger children put to bed, looking out toward the road. Though there was rarely anything to see out there in the dark but the shapes of fence posts and the far-off glow of a neighbor's lamp, she would stand there sometimes for what felt to my child's mind like a very long while, her hands finally still, which was itself unusual enough that I noticed it even then, and then she would seem to catch herself, the way you catch a dropped stitch before it can run any further, and she would turn back to the room and ask which of us needed our hair braided for the morning, and the moment, whatever it had been, would close over like water over a stone. I remember, too, that my mother had a particular hymn she favored above all the others we sang, a slow, mournful old melody about a wanderer far from home, and that she sang it more quietly than she sang any other hymn, her voice dropping almost to nothing on certain lines, so that as a girl I used to lean toward her on the bench, just to catch the words, thinking she simply had a softer singing voice than the other women. I understand now, though I cannot prove it, and perhaps I am only seeing what I now know is there to be seen, that perhaps that hymn meant something more particular to her than it meant to the rest of us, something about wandering, and distance, and a home that could not be reached again. My mother was not a cold woman. I want to make certain you understand that. She was tender with us in her own particular fashion, tender the way plain people are tender, through action rather than through words. She would sit up through the night with any of us who took sick, pressing cool cloths to fevered foreheads, without ever once complaining of her own exhaustion. She would slip an extra spoonful of preserves onto a child's plate on a hard day without comment, a small unspoken kindness that said more than any embrace might have. She taught each of her daughters to sew, to can, to bake bread that would rise light and even, patiently correcting our mistakes without ever once raising her voice above its ordinary quiet register. I loved her deeply my whole life, and I want you to understand that nothing I learned from that letter has changed that love. Not even a little. It has only deepened it and complicated it in ways I am still learning to hold. There was one particular memory that returned to me again and again in the weeks after I found the letter, a memory I had not thought of in decades. I was perhaps 7 years old, playing in the yard on a summer afternoon, when an English car, a rare enough sight on our road in those years, slowed as it passed our farm and then continued on. I remember my mother, who had been hanging wash on the line, going suddenly and completely still, watching that car until it disappeared around the bend, her wooden clothespins forgotten in her apron pocket, her face turned toward the road in an expression I had no name for as a child, and did not think of again for 72 years, until the day I sat with that letter in my lap and understood, all at once, exactly what that stillness had been. I do not know if that particular car held Thomas, or some other Englisher entirely unconnected to any of this, driving past our farm on some ordinary errand of his own, never once imagining the effect his passing car had on the woman standing at the clothesline. I will never know, and I have made my peace with never knowing. The way I have had to make my peace with so many small, unanswerable questions this last year. But I know what I saw in my mother's face that day, even if I did not understand it then, and I know now, finally, what it meant. I grew up on our family's dairy farm, second of 7 children, with my older brother Levi ahead of me and 5 more behind. We rose before the sun to milk. We walked to the one-room schoolhouse until the 8th grade the way all Amish children do. And then we came home to work. Because that is what growing up Amish means. It means your hands are needed before your opinions ever are. My father, whom I called Dad the way we all did, was a broad, silent man who loved horses more than he loved talking, and who I adored the way a little girl adores a father, who lifts her onto the seat of the hay wagon and lets her hold the reins even though she is far too small to control the team. But there was something between my mother and my father that I could not name as a child, and it took me most of my life to even begin to name it as a grown woman. It was not unkindness. My father was never unkind to my mother, not once that I ever witnessed. But there was a distance in the house, a careful distance, like two people walking on either side of a fence line, close enough to speak, never quite close enough to touch without meaning to. My other Amish friends' parents, I noticed even then, had a different kind of quiet between them, an easier one, a quiet that came from comfort rather than from careful distance. I did not have words for this as a girl. I only felt it, the way you feel a draft in a house before you find the window that is letting it in. My mother kept a cedar chest at the foot of her bed. It had been her mother's before her, brought over, she told us once, on a boat from Switzerland generations back, though the chest itself was newer than that, remade and repaired so many times that perhaps only the idea of it was truly old. Inside that chest she kept her wedding quilt, a lock of hair from each of her babies tied with thread, some of my grandfather's tools, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a square of blue calico fabric, a family Bible that had belonged to her own mother. I was never allowed to go into that chest. It was not forbidden in the way a sin is forbidden. My mother never scolded harshly. She simply said, quietly, "That chest is mine, Miriam," in a tone that closed the conversation the way a barn door closes against a coming storm. And so I did not go into it, not as a curious child, not as a nosy teenager during my Rumspringa years, not even as a grown woman visiting my aging mother with children of my own. I respected her the way we are raised to respect our elders, without question, and I assumed, the way children always assume, that whatever was in that chest was simply hers, and that was reason enough. Let me tell you a little more about the life we lived, because I think you cannot understand a secret this size unless you understand the world it had to hide inside of. Our farm sat along a dirt lane off the main road, with a white farmhouse, a red barn bigger than the house itself, and fields of corn and alfalfa stretching back toward a line of trees where a creek ran cold and clear even in the driest part of summer. We had no electric wires running to our house, no telephone sitting in a hallway, no automobile parked beside the barn. We had horses. We had oil lamps. We had a wood stove that my mother fed from before dawn until after dark, every single day of her life that I can remember. Sunday was for church, held every other week in the home of a different family in our district. The men in one room, the women in another. The service in Pennsylvania Dutch, 3 hours long, the benches hard beneath us, and afterward a meal shared among all the families, the children running loose in the yard while the grown-ups sat and visited in a way that, looking back now, feels to me like the closest thing our world had to a newspaper, a radio, and a telephone, all rolled into one long Sunday afternoon of talk. The other Sunday, the one without church, was for visiting, for rest, for reading scripture aloud in the evenings by lamplight while my mother's needle moved steadily through whatever quilt square she was piecing that season. I tell you all this not because I think you need a history lesson, but because I want you to understand that in a world this small, this watched, this woven together thread by every family knowing every other family's business, a secret the size of the one my mother carried was not simply difficult to keep. It was, in a very real sense, a kind of quiet miracle that she managed to keep it at all, for the better part of a century, in a community where very little escapes notice for very long. I want to pause here and ask you again, because I do not want you to forget. Please like this video if you have made it this far, and leave me a comment telling me if you have ever kept a secret from someone you loved for their own good, or if someone has ever kept one from you. I think you will understand by the end of this story why that question matters so much to me now. Let me tell you about my own growing up, because it matters to what came later. When I was 16, I entered my Rumspringa, as all our young people do. For those of you watching who are not familiar with our ways, Rumspringa is the time when Amish young people are given a measure of freedom, a chance to see something of the world outside the fences of our faith before they choose, with open eyes, whether to be baptized into the church or to leave it. Most of us choose to stay. I chose to stay. But during that time, I discovered things about my mother's own Rumspringa that she had never told a single soul, and that I would not learn myself for another 60 years. You see, the way it is often done in our community, a young person during Rumspringa might work for a time in town, for an English family, or in a shop, to earn a little money and see a little more of the world before settling into farm life for good. I worked, during mine, in a fabric and dry goods store owned by an English family named the Millers in the small town nearest our farm. It was during this time, sweeping the floors of that store and folding bolts of cloth, that I began to hear things about my own mother that did not match the woman I thought I knew. An old woman named Dorothy, who came into the store every Tuesday for thread, once looked at me for a long moment and said, "You have your mother's eyes, you know." Rebecca Fisher. I remember her from years back when she used to come to town with that young man. Oh, what was his name? Before she married your father. And then she caught herself, the way older people sometimes catch themselves when they realize they have said more than they meant to in front of a young ear, and she waved her hand and said, "Never you mind an old woman's memory. It plays tricks." And she bought her thread and left. I did not think much of it at the time. I was 16, and full of my own small dramas, and an old English woman's half-remembered gossip about my mother's youth seemed as distant and unimportant as a story about somebody else's grandmother. I did not even mention it to my mother. Why would I? It was nothing. A scrap, a stray thread from a bolt of cloth long since sold and worn and forgotten. But it is strange, is it not, how the mind keeps such things, tucked away in some drawer we do not even know we have, until years later something comes along and pulls that drawer open, and there is the scrap of thread, waiting, exactly where you left it. And suddenly, it is not nothing at all. Suddenly, it is the loose end of an entire garment you did not even know you had been wearing your whole life. I finished my Rumspringa, and like most young women in our community, I chose baptism, and not long after, I chose marriage. My husband was a good man named Eli, quiet in the way my father was quiet, hard-working, gentle with the children, faithful to God and to me for 41 years, until his heart gave out in the barn on an ordinary Tuesday morning while he was forking hay to the cows. I met Eli the way most of our young people meet, at a youth singing on a Sunday evening, a gathering of the district's unmarried young folk in someone's barn, benches arranged in a square, hymns sung in the slow, old way we sing them, verse after verse stretched out long and full until the whole barn seemed to hum with it. Eli was 2 years older than me, the third son of a family that farmed some miles from ours, and I remember noticing him not because he was loud or funny or quick with a joke the way some of the young men liked to be, but because he was the sort of young man who listened. He would sit at the edge of a conversation and simply listen, and when he finally spoke, it was always worth having waited for. He began driving me home from the singings in his open buggy that autumn. the two of us bundled against the cold with a woolen blanket over our knees. The horse's hooves the only sound on the dark road besides our own careful, halting talk. He did not speak of love the way I imagine English boys do, with grand words and quick promises. He spoke of his plans for a farm of his own, of the kind of horses he hoped to raise, of a hymn he had liked especially that evening, and somewhere inside all that plain, careful talk, I came to understand that he was, in his own quiet way, asking me to imagine a whole life beside him, one small, ordinary sentence at a time. We married in November, the traditional month for Amish weddings, after the harvest is in a service that lasted the better part of a day, followed by a wedding meal prepared by an army of aunts and cousins, roast chicken and creamed celery, and more pie than any one farmhouse table has ever held before or since. My mother wore her good dark dress and stood near the kitchen door most of that day, and I remember, even then, though I did not understand it at the time, that there was something in her face as she watched me exchange my vows that seemed to carry more than ordinary motherly emotion. I thought it was simply the natural sorrow and joy a mother feels giving a daughter over to marriage. I understand now that it may have carried something else besides, some private echo of a wedding day of her own, and of vows she had made while carrying a truth none of the guests in that room could have guessed at. Eli and I built our life together the way most young Amish couples do. Slowly, plainly, one season folding into the next. We started with a small rented farm 2 miles from my parents, and within 8 years we had saved and worked enough to buy a place of our own. Our 6 children came steadily across those years. Levi first, named for my own older brother. Then Anna. Then twin boys we lost one of within his first week of life. A grief I still carry quietly, the way my mother taught me to carry all grief. Then 2 more daughters, and a final son, who came when I was already past 40, and thought my childbearing years well behind me. I do not tell you about Eli to dwell on my own grief, though I have grieved him every single day since his passing 7 years before my mother's own death, in the small private way we are taught to grieve. Without wailing, without display, only in the quiet moving of my hands over his old coat that I still keep hanging by the door. I tell you about Eli because it was after his death, when I was 72 years old and a widow myself, that I began to understand my mother in a way I never had before. Though the full truth would not come to me for 7 more years. When Eli died, I grieved the way my mother had always grieved, quietly, with my hands busy, my face composed. And one day, not long after the funeral, my mother, who was then in her 90s, and beginning to fail in body though her mind stayed sharp as a needle until nearly the very end, took my hand in hers, which was a thing she rarely did. We were not a family given to much touching, and she said to me, "Miriam, grief does not end. It only learns to sit quieter in the room." And then she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something that looked almost like fear, or perhaps like guilt, though I did not understand at the time why my mother, of all people, the most blameless and quiet woman I had ever known, would look at me with guilt in her eyes over the death of my husband, a thing that surely had nothing to do with her at all. I did not ask her what she meant. That was not our way. We let silences sit the way we let bread dough sit, trusting that whatever needed to rise would rise in its own time, without our poking at it. I only nodded, and thanked her for her comfort, and went home to my empty side of the bed, and did not think of that strange look again for a long while. If you are still with me, and I hope you are, because we are only getting to the heart of things now, I want you to do something for me. Comment below and tell me your age, and tell me if you have ever noticed, the older you get, that the people who raised you seem to become more mysterious to you rather than less. The way a familiar hillside can look entirely different in a new light. That is what happened to me with my mother in the last 7 years of her life. The older she got, and the older I got alongside her, the less I understood her, even though I had known her every single day of my 79 years. And do not forget, if this story is holding you the way I hope it is, hit that subscribe button now, because the next part is the part that changed everything I thought I knew about my own life. My mother lived to be 101 years old. She outlived my father by 31 years, having never remarried, which was not unusual among widows in our community, though even that, looking back now, sits differently in my memory than it did while I was living through it. I remember thinking, as a younger woman, that my mother simply preferred her own quiet company, that she had never been the sort to seek out companionship the way some widows do. I understand now that perhaps there was another reason entirely, that perhaps a heart that has already given itself so completely, and lost so completely, finds it difficult to open itself a second time, even decades later, even to a kind and worthy man who might have asked her, had she given him the chance. In her last decade, she moved into the small grandmother house, what we call the Dadi house, attached to my younger brother's farm, and I would visit her 3, sometimes 4 times a week, bringing her canned peaches, sitting with her while she pieced quilts with hands that had grown gnarled but never lost their sureness. In those final years, she began, very occasionally, to say things that struck me as odd, little cracks in the smooth, quiet surface she had presented to the world for the better part of a century. Once, watching my youngest granddaughter run across the yard chasing a chicken, my mother said, "Out of nowhere, some children we are given the chance to raise, and some we are not, and I do not think God holds either kind against us." I remember thinking it was an odd thing to say, and a little sad, though I did not press her on it, because that was not our way, and because I assumed, if I thought of it at all, that she was speaking of some general grief about a stillborn baby she had lost between my younger sister and me, a loss she had mentioned only once, briefly, decades before. Another time, near the very end, when her mind would sometimes drift back through decades the way an old woman's mind does, she called me by a name that was not mine. She said, quite clearly, holding my hand, "Thomas, is that you? You came back." And I said gently, the way you learn to be gentle with the very old, "No, ma'am. It's Miriam, your daughter." And she blinked and seemed to come back to herself and said, "Of course. Of course it is," and did not speak of it again. But I remember the way her hand had tightened on mine when she said that name. Thomas. Tightened the way you grip something you are afraid of losing, not the way you grip something that means nothing to you. I did not know then who Thomas was. I would not know for several more months, but something in me, some old instinct, some scrap of memory pulled from a drawer I did not know I had, made me think, quietly, in the back of my mind where I did not examine it too closely, of an old woman named Dorothy in a dry goods store 60 years before, saying, "You have your mother's eyes, you know, before she married your father," and catching herself before she could say more. My mother died on a Thursday morning in November, quietly, in her sleep, in the little Dadi hause, with the quilt she had pieced herself pulled up to her chin. I was not there when she passed, though I had sat with her the evening before, and I have made a kind of peace with that, the way you must make peace with the things you cannot control, no matter how much you wish. Even now, that I had stayed that one extra night. We buried her the way we bury all our dead, plainly without ornament, in the small cemetery behind our meeting house, beside my father, under a plain stone that says only her name and her dates. The way every stone in that cemetery says only a name and dates, because we believe that in death, as in life, we are all equal before God, and no one's grief or memory needs more marking than anyone else's. If you have lost a parent, I am sorry, truly, and I want you to know that whatever grief you are carrying, it is allowed to sit in the room with you, as long as it needs to. Please, before I go on, leave a comment and tell me a little about them. Your mother, your father, whoever raised you. I would love to hear it, and it would mean a great deal to this old woman sitting here telling you her story. And if you have not yet subscribed, now would be a very good time, because everything I am about to tell you, I have never told another living soul except my own children, and even them, not fully. It was 3 weeks after the funeral that my younger brother, the one whose farm held the Dadi horse, asked me to come help sort through my mother's few belongings. In our community, we do not accumulate much. We are not people of possessions, and so the task was not a large one. A few dresses, some kitchen things, her sewing basket, and of course the old cedar chest, which had been moved into the Dadi halls with her when she left the main farmhouse. I opened that chest for the first time in my life on a cold afternoon in early December, with my brother in the next room and my own hands trembling slightly, though I told myself it was only the cold. Inside, just as I remembered from childhood glimpses, was the wedding quilt, faded now, the lock of hair from each of her babies, my grandfather's old tools wrapped in oilcloth, and at the very bottom, the family Bible wrapped in its square of blue calico. The same blue calico, I realized with a small shock, that I remembered from 60 years before, worn now nearly to threads at the folds. But the same. I lifted the Bible out, and it was heavier than a Bible ought to be, and when I opened its cover, I understood why. Tucked inside, between the front cover and the first page of Genesis, was an envelope, yellowed with age, the paper gone soft and thin as cloth from decades of being folded and unfolded, folded and unfolded. The way you fold and unfold a thing you cannot bring yourself to either destroy or fully put away. On the front of the envelope, in handwriting that was not my mother's careful, plain script but a looser, more flowing English hand, was written a single word: Rebecca. I sat there for a long moment simply holding it. I want you to understand, if you can, what it means to hold something your mother kept hidden for the entirety of your life. Something she never once mentioned in 79 years. Something folded inside the one book she surely opened every single day of her existence, and yet never once let you see. It felt, in that moment, less like paper and more like a held breath finally released. The very breath I told you earlier that I had always sensed underneath her quiet. And now here it was in my hands, decades old, still holding its shape. I did not open it right away. I want to be honest with you about that. I sat with it closed in my lap for perhaps 20 minutes, my brother's voice murmuring in the next room over the sound of him going through our mother's kitchen things, and I asked myself whether I had any right to open a letter that was not addressed to me, even though the woman it was addressed to was gone now, and had left it, deliberately, inside a Bible that had passed, upon her death, to me, her second child and eldest daughter. I decided, in the end, that if my mother had wanted this letter destroyed, she had 90 years and more to burn it in the wood stove that sat not 20 feet from where she slept every single night. She had chosen instead to keep it, to carry it from farmhouse to Dadi Ho's, to fold and unfold it enough times to wear the paper soft as fabric. Whatever this letter held, my mother had wanted it to survive her. And so, with hands that I will admit to you were shaking, not from the cold anymore, I opened it. Before I tell you what was written on that page, I want to ask you, one more time, please like this video, subscribe if you have not already, and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. It matters to me more than I can say, to know that this old woman's story is reaching so many places I will never see with my own eyes. Now, let me tell you what my mother hid from me for 79 years. The letter was dated some months after my own birth, which surprised me immediately, because I had assumed, if I had assumed anything at all, that whatever this letter held would belong to my mother's own girlhood, before her marriage to my father. Instead, the date placed it squarely in the early months of my own infancy, and the handwriting, once I settled into reading it, was warm, plain, urgent in a quiet way, the way a person writes when they are choosing every word with great care, because they know they may not get another chance to choose any at all. The letter began, "My dearest Rebecca, I do not know if this will reach you, or if you will read it, or if you will burn it the moment you see my hand upon the envelope. But I could not let another season pass without writing what I should have said to your face those years ago, when I was too much a coward and too little a man to say it." I read those opening lines perhaps 5 times before I could make myself continue, because even in those first 2 sentences I understood I was holding something far larger than an old love letter. There was an apology in those words, and a grief, and a kind of desperate carefulness. The careful phrasing of a man who knew he had only this one chance, this one letter, to say everything that needed saying, and who was terrified of getting even a single word of it wrong. I want to explain to you now who Thomas was, the name my mother had called me by her bedside in her last months, the name I now understood, sitting in that cold room with the letter trembling in my hands, was not some passing confusion of an old woman's failing mind, but a name that had lived inside her, folded and unfolded, for the whole of her long life. Thomas, the letter went on to explain, in his own words, had been a young Englisher, a boy from town, the son of the very millers who owned the dry goods store where I myself would work decades later during my own Rumspringa. Though of course I did not know that connection yet as I sat there reading. He and my mother, it seemed, had known each other during her own Rumspringa years, before she was baptized, before she married my father, in that brief window of freedom when Amish young people sometimes cross paths with the English world in ways that rarely, but sometimes, become something more than mere acquaintance. The letter did not dwell over long on the particulars of how they had come to know each other, whether it was through her own work in town during those years, or through some chance meeting at a market, but it spoke, with a kind of aching plainness, of a love between them that had grown despite everything standing against it, the fences of faith and family and community that stood, as they always stand, between our world and the world outside it. Thomas wrote of long conversations held along fence lines at dusk, when my mother would find some small errand that let her walk near the edge of the Miller property on her way home from town, of a single dance he had taught her once, in secret, in the loft of his family's barn, of a promise, made and broken again, each of them trying and failing to walk away from something neither one of them seemed able to let go of. He wrote that he had asked my mother more than once to leave with him, to choose him and the English world over the faith she had been raised in, and that she had refused him, gently but firmly, choosing instead her baptism, her community, her God. Though he wrote, too, that each time she refused him, something in her voice told him the refusal cost her more than she would ever let herself say, aloud. But the letter made clear that this parting had not been so clean as either of them might have hoped, because by the time my mother made her choice, made her vows, married my father in the plain ceremony our community holds sacred, she was already carrying a child. My child. Me. I sat in that cold room with that letter in my lap, and I want to tell you, I did not weep right away. I have found, in my long life, that the largest truths often arrive too big for tears at first. The way a wave too large to feel as water simply lifts you and carries you before you understand you are even wet. I simply sat and read the words again and again, my mother's careful hand nowhere on that page at all. Only Thomas's looping English script telling me, 79 years after the fact, that the man I had called Dad my entire life, the broad, silent man who had lifted me onto hay wagons and let me hold reins I was too small to control, was not by blood my father at all. Thomas wrote that he had learned of my birth from a mutual acquaintance in town, some months after the fact. A piece of news, he said, that had struck him like a physical blow. Standing in his own father's store, folding bolts of cloth much the way I myself would come to fold them decades later, without ever guessing why the work had felt, at times, so strangely and inexplicably heavy in my hands. He wrote that he had struggled with himself over what to do, whether it was right to intrude upon the life my mother had built, the marriage she had chosen, the community that had taken her back, and would surely never take her back again if the truth of me were known. He wrote, too, of the nights he had sat at his own kitchen table with pen in hand, trying and failing to find the words, tearing up page after page, because every version he wrote seemed either too demanding, asking of her more than she could safely give, or too distant, saying less than what his heart actually held. He wrote that he had decided, in the end, to write this one letter, and only this one, to tell her that he did not resent her choice, that he understood the impossible weight of it, that he only wanted her to know that not a single day passed that he did not think of her, and of the child he would never be allowed to know, and that if she ever needed anything, anything at all, for herself or for the little one, she had only to send word, and he would come, faith or no faith, fences or no fences. He wrote one final thing, near the bottom of that worn page, that I have read so many times now in the months since, that I could recite it to you word for word without looking. Though I will not, because I think some words are meant to stay folded. Even now, even after everything, he wrote that he hoped, whatever else became of them both, that the child, meaning me, would grow up loved and steady, and never once have cause to wonder whether she was wanted, and that if he could give my mother one single gift across all the miles and all the years that would surely separate them from that day forward, it would be his silence, freely given, for as long as she needed it, so that the child could have exactly that. He signed it, yours, in this life and whatever comes after, Thomas. I do not know how long I sat there. Long enough that my brother eventually called through the wall to ask if I had found anything of interest. And I called back, in a voice I made as steady as I could manage, that I had only found some old letters, nothing of importance, and I would bring them home to look through properly. I want to be honest with you, because I think this story only means something if I am honest, and I did lie to my own brother in that moment. The first outright lie I believe I had told him in 60 years of life, because I did not yet know what I felt, and I could not bear to explain a thing I did not understand to another living soul, before I had even begun to understand it myself. If you are still here with me, if this story has found its way into your evening the way I hope it has, please take just a moment now to like this video and subscribe. Because I promise you, the way I found peace with all of this, the way I came to understand my mother not as a woman who deceived me, but as a woman who protected me. The way I decided what to do with what I had learned, all of that is still ahead of us, and I do not want you to miss a single word of it. And please, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It matters to me. It truly does. More than you can know. I drove my buggy home that evening in a kind of fog, the letter folded back into its Bible, the Bible wrapped in its blue calico, sitting on the seat beside me the way a living passenger might sit, silent, heavy, undeniably present. I did not tell my husband, because my husband had been gone 7 years by then. And there is a particular loneliness, let me tell you, in discovering the largest truth of your life, with no one beside you in bed that night, to whom you can whisper it in the dark. I did tell my children, eventually, though not all at once, and not right away. I want to explain to you why it took me some weeks to even begin speaking of it, because I think it matters. In our community, the truth I had learned was not a small thing. It was not simply a private family matter the way it might be in the English world, where a person might discover a hidden parent and treat it as a piece of interesting family history to be shared over dinner. Among us, the circumstances of my birth, had they been known at the time, would have meant something very different for my mother. It would have meant, quite possibly, that she would not have been permitted to remain in the church. That she would have been shunned, that my father, the man I called Dad, would have faced an impossible choice of his own, whether to stand by a woman carrying another man's child, or to turn away as our discipline of that era might have expected of him. And so I understood, sitting with that letter in the weeks after my mother's death, why she had never spoken of it. It was not only her own shame she had been protecting, if shame is even the right word for a love that came before her vows, and that she gave up entirely for the sake of those vows. It was my father's dignity she was protecting, and mine, and the whole shape of the life she had built for all of us, a life that depended entirely on a story that was not, in its smallest details, entirely true. I want to say something here that took me many months to arrive at, and that I only offer to you now because I believe it with my whole heart. My father, the man who raised me, who taught me to drive a team of horses, who sat beside my bed the 2 times I was seriously ill as a girl and did not leave until the fever broke, who walked me down the aisle of our meeting house on my wedding day with tears standing unshed in his eyes, the way our men are taught to hold them. That man was my father in every way that has ever mattered to me. Blood is a fact. But fatherhood, I have come to believe, is a practice, a daily choosing, over and over, for as many years as a life allows, and by that measure, there has only ever been one father in my life, and his name was not Thomas. But that does not mean the letter meant nothing. It meant a great deal, and it still does. It meant that my mother, this quiet woman I had spent 79 years believing I understood completely, had carried a private grief and a private love inside her for the entirety of her adult life, folded small enough to fit inside a Bible, small enough that none of us, not her husband, not her 7 children, not the community that thought it knew her so well, ever guessed at the size of what she was carrying. I think of her now, in her 90s, holding my hand and saying, "Thomas, is that you? You came back. And I understand now that she was not confused at all. Not in the way we thought. I believe some door in her mind, weakened by age the way all our doors weaken eventually, had simply come open. And what was behind it had walked forward for one moment into the light of her final months. A moment of nearly 70 years of buried longing given voice at last. Before she caught herself. The way she had caught herself her whole life, and folded it back down small enough to hide again. I think, too, of the moment she told me, watching my granddaughter chase a chicken across the yard. Some children we are given the chance to raise, and some we are not, and I do not think God holds either kind against us. I understand now she was not speaking only of the baby she lost between my sister and me. She was speaking, I believe, of a child she had raised as her own, meaning me, and perhaps, in some private corner of her heart, of the child Thomas might have imagined. In some other life, in some other world, raising alongside her. I have spent this last year, since my mother's passing, trying to decide what to do with what I know, and I want to share with you where I have landed, though I will tell you honestly that I am still not entirely certain it is the right place to land, only that it is the place that lets me sleep at night. I made some quiet inquiries, through channels available even to a woman who has never used a telephone in her own home. I asked my grandson, a good boy who works part-time for an English contractor, and has some ease moving between our world and the world outside it, to help me learn what he could, gently, carefully, without explaining to him fully why an old woman wanted to know about a man named Thomas Miller, who would have lived in a nearby town the better part of a century ago. I told my grandson only that it concerned an old family matter I wished to settle for my own peace, before I too was called home, and being a good boy, raised to respect his elders' privacy, he did not press me further than that. It took some weeks, letters written and a few telephone calls made on my behalf to a historical society 2 counties over, before word came back to me. I learned that Thomas had lived a long life, into his late 80s, passing only some dozen years before my mother herself. He had married, late, an English woman named Carol, some dozen years his junior, and by all the records my grandson could find, they had raised no children of their own, though I read, with an ache I did not expect, that they had for many years fostered, and later informally cared for several children in their community who needed a steady home. An old widow at the Historical Society, telling my grandson that Thomas Miller was known locally as a kind man, a patient man, a man who seemed to have an especially soft spot for children who did not belong fully to anyone. I sat with that detail for a long while after my grandson brought it back to me. I do not know, and I will never know, whether Thomas spent his whole life quietly, privately grieving the one child he knew was his, and was never permitted to raise, pouring what love he could not give directly to me into other children who crossed his path and needed steady hands and a patient heart. I like to believe that is what happened, though I know I am perhaps only telling myself the story I need to hear in order to make peace with a man I will never meet. A man whose blood runs in my own veins, and in the veins of all 6 of my children, and every one of my grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, though not one of them. Save myself, now, and you. Watching this tonight has any notion that it is there at all. I learned, too, that Thomas never moved from the town he was born in, not once in his whole long life, which struck me as a strange, quiet echo of my own life. An old Amish woman who never left her home county, and an old Englisher, somewhere not 30 miles distant across all those decades, who likewise never left his. I wonder sometimes if they ever crossed paths again after that one letter. If perhaps he saw her from a distance at a market or a roadside stand across the years, an old Amish woman in a buggy, and wondered, and said nothing. The way both of them, in their different worlds, seemed to have spent their whole lives saying nothing about the largest truth either of them ever carried. I found, in an old newspaper notice of his passing, that the Historical Society was kind enough to copy out for my grandson a single line that undid me more than the letter itself had. A line that said he was survived by his wife Carol and predeceased by no children. A plain, factual English phrase that nonetheless told me he had never, in his whole long life, claimed me, had honored, even in the smallest print of his own obituary, my mother's choice to keep me hidden away inside a life he was never permitted to enter. I do not know if that silence was a kindness to my mother's memory, protecting her secret even in his own death notice, decades after they had last spoken, or if it was simply the plain truth as the world understood it, that a man who never raised a child, never held that child, never once was permitted to speak her name aloud to another living soul, might reasonably be recorded, in the end, as a man predeceased by none. I have not told my own children the whole of it. Not yet. Though I am telling you, a stranger, scattered across the world in ways I cannot even picture, watching this on whatever device you are holding right now. I think perhaps it is easier to tell strangers than family. Sometimes. Because a stranger cannot look at you across a Sunday dinner table for the rest of your shared life, with this knowledge sitting between you the way it sits between me and this camera today. Perhaps that is a kind of cowardice on my part. Perhaps it is only the same instinct my mother had, to protect the people you love from a truth that would only unsettle the ground they stand on, without changing anything they actually need to know, in order to live well and love truly. Let me tell you a little about my own children, because I think it matters to how carefully I have moved with all of this. My oldest, Levi, named for my brother, farms the very ground Eli and I built our life on, with his own wife and children now grown and some of them married with children of their own, so that I have great-grandchildren now, more of them than I can always keep perfectly straight in my mind when they come running through my door on a Sunday afternoon, though I love every single one of them with the same fierce, quiet love I have carried for all of my own children since the day each one was placed in my arms. My daughter Anna lives 2 farms over, and she is the one who checks on me most often now that I live alone in my own small daddy house, much the way my mother once lived in hers. She brings me eggs from her hens and sits with me some evenings while I piece quilts the way my mother once pieced them. My own hands slower now than my mother's ever seemed to be, but steady still, God be thanked. My other children are scattered across 2 counties, all of them married within the faith, all of them raising their own families in the plain, steady way we were raised. And I confess there is a part of me, watching them, that feels the weight of this letter most heavily, when I look at their faces and wonder how each of them might carry this news differently. Some perhaps with an easy grace. Others perhaps with a harder struggle to reconcile it with everything they believed about their own grandmother. I raised all 6 of my children the way my mother raised me, with early mornings and hard work and quiet expectations, with scripture read aloud each evening and hymns sung at the supper table on Sunday nights, with more love than words, because words were never our way of showing it. I taught my daughters to quilt the way my mother taught me, sitting 3 generations of women around the same frame some winters, my mother's hands, my own, and my daughter's younger ones, all moving together over the same stretched fabric, needles catching the lamplight, though of course none of us at that frame, myself included, had any notion of the secret sitting folded inside a Bible not 30 feet from where we sat and stitched. I think of those quilting afternoons differently now. I wonder how many times my mother sat at that frame with us, laughing quietly at some small joke one of the children made, her needle moving steady and sure, while somewhere behind her eyes a whole other life sat folded away, a life with a name in it, a face, a love she had chosen, with great cost to herself, never to speak of again. I do not know how a person carries a thing like that for so many decades and still manages to laugh at a child's small joke, still manages to bake bread and can tomatoes and nurse sick children through fevers with a steady hand. I only know that my mother did, every single day, for the whole length of a very long life, and I find myself, the older I get, more in awe of her than I have ever been of any other person I have known. I have thought a great deal, too, about what it must have cost my mother in those early years especially, in the months right after my birth, to look at me, a second child, and know a truth about me that no one else in her world was permitted to know. I have raised babies of my own, and I know the particular searching way a new mother studies her infant's face, looking for whose nose that is, whose eyes, whose stubborn chin. I wonder if my mother looked at me in those early weeks and saw Thomas looking back at her, and I wonder how many times across the years that followed, as I grew from an infant into a girl into a young woman standing at her own wedding, my mother caught some flash of a face that was not my father's in some turn of my expression. Some way I laughed, some way I held my hands, and had to look quickly away, back down to whatever work was in front of her, before anyone noticed the flicker crossing her own quiet face. I have decided, in the end, that I will tell my children, in time, when the moment feels right, the way you wait for bread dough to finish its rising rather than forcing the oven before its time. I have decided that the truth of my birth does not change who my father was to me, does not change who my mother was to me, does not change the shape of the long, plain, faithful life I have lived among my people. But I have also decided that I will not fold this letter back into a Bible and let it disappear into a chest for another 79 years. I have decided to let it breathe a little, the way my mother, I think, always wished she could let her own truth breathe, if only the world she lived in had allowed it. I think often, these days, about the particular kind of courage it must have taken my mother to make the choice she made. All those years ago, standing at some crossroads I can only imagine now. A young woman carrying a child that was not her husband's, carrying too a love that the whole shape of her world would not permit her to keep. It would have been easier in some ways for her to go with Thomas, to leave the fences and the plain dresses and the slow Sunday hymns behind, and build a different sort of life entirely, an English life, in the world just beyond our borders. Many young people, in their Rumspringa, do exactly that, and no shame follows them for it among those who understand the choice was truly theirs to make with open eyes. But my mother chose to stay, and more than that, she chose to build with my father. A life so plain and steady and faithful that not one of her 7 children, not one of her 19 grandchildren, not one single soul in our entire district ever suspected, across nearly 100 years, that anything about her was other than exactly what it appeared to be. That is not the choice of a weak woman or a deceitful one. I have come to believe, turning it over these many months, that it was the choice of an extraordinarily strong one, a woman who decided that the life she could build for her children mattered more than the life she might have kept for herself, and who then spent the rest of her days making good on that decision, one quiet, careful day at a time, for the better part of a century. I think of my father, too, differently now than I once did. I do not know, and I will never know, whether he suspected the truth of my birth, whether some version of this story was known between the two of them in whispered words exchanged only once, long before I was born, and never spoken of again between them for the whole of their married life. I like to imagine, though I cannot prove it, that he knew, and that he chose me anyway, chose to raise me as fully his own, without a shadow of difference in how he loved me compared to my brother Levi or any of my other siblings who did share his blood. If that is true, then my father's love for me was not simply an accident of biology, the way most fathers' love begins. It was, from the very first day, a choice, renewed every single morning for as long as he lived, and I think that makes it, if anything, larger rather than smaller. I have thought, too, about what it means that I never knew. Not for 79 years. Not for one single day of my long life, until a folded letter fell out of an old Bible into my trembling hands. I have asked myself whether my mother was right to keep it from me for so long, and I confess I still do not have a single clean answer to that question. Part of me wishes she had told me sooner, had let me carry some of the weight of it alongside her, instead of carrying it entirely alone for the length of an entire lifetime. But a larger part of me understands that she was protecting something precious and fragile. Not only her own standing in our community, but the simple, uncomplicated love I was able to have for my father for the whole of his life. A love that might have grown complicated, even if it never grew any smaller, had I known the truth of it while he was still alive. To see the difference in my eyes. I have turned this question over so many times these past months, lying awake in the small hours the way I imagine my mother herself must have lain awake countless nights across her own long life, that I do not think I will ever fully settle it, and perhaps that is as it should be. Some truths, I have come to believe, are not meant to be settled neatly. The way you settle a debt or finish a hymn. Some truths are meant to be carried, turned over, examined again in different lights across different seasons of a life, until at last you make a kind of peace with them. Not because you have found a final answer, but because you have simply grown large enough, and old enough, and patient enough to hold the question without needing to resolve it. That is why I am telling you. All of you, wherever you are watching this tonight, in whatever country, in whatever kitchen or living room, or late-night bed you are lying in with your phone held above your face, the way I am told so many of you do. I am an old woman. I have lived nearly 80 years believing I understood the shape of my own life completely, and I have learned, in the last year, that even the people closest to us, even the ones who love us most carefully and most quietly, are carrying rooms inside themselves that we may never be permitted to enter, unless, by some grace, a letter survives long enough to open a door for us after they are gone. I want to leave you with this thought, and then I want to ask you, one final time, for the things that matter to an old woman making these videos in her later years. If someone you love is quiet in a way that puzzles you, quiet in a way that seems to hold something back, consider that their silence may not be coldness, and it may not be secrecy for its own sake. It may be love. Love so large and so complicated that it could find no smaller container than silence to survive inside of, for as long as it needed to survive. I think, too, about how differently I might have judged my mother had I learned this truth while she still lived, in some hasty moment, some careless slip of the tongue from an old neighbor, rather than in the careful, deliberate way it finally came to me. Folded inside her own Bible, released only after she was safely beyond the reach of my anger, my confusion, my questions. I understand now that even in her dying, my mother was still protecting me, still choosing the gentlest possible way for this truth to reach me, A truth she could not bring herself to speak aloud, but could not bring herself to destroy either. I do not think that is the mark of a deceitful woman. I think it is the mark of a woman who loved so carefully and so completely that even her secrets were shaped, in the end, by love rather than by fear. I have come to believe, in this last year of turning it all over in my mind while I piece my quilts and sit on my porch in the evenings watching the light go gold over the fields, that every family carries at least one such letter, whether it is made of paper or not. Some truth folded small and tucked away out of love rather than deception, waiting for its own proper season to be found. I do not know what letter your own family may be carrying, the one you have not found yet, or the one you are perhaps carrying yourself, for someone else's sake, the way my mother carried hers for mine. I only know that when it finally comes into the light, whether that light arrives gently, the way mine did, or suddenly, the way I imagine it does for some of you, it rarely destroys what came before it. More often, I think, it only deepens it. The way a well grows deeper and colder and truer the further down you dig, until you strike water you did not even know was there. Water that had been sustaining the whole life above it all along, unseen. And if you yourself are carrying a letter, whether it is made of paper or only of memory, that you have never shown to the people who love you, I do not tell you what you must do with it. I only tell you that mine sat inside a Bible for 79 years, and when it finally came into the light, it did not destroy the life my mother built. It only made me understand how much more that life had cost her to build than any of us had ever known, and it made me love her more fiercely, not less, for every quiet year she carried it alone, so that the rest of us could live in the peace she had bought, with her own private grief. If this story has meant something to you tonight, please like this video and subscribe to this channel, because I have so many more stories to tell you. Stories from a long life, lived plain and slow and full. And I promise you I will keep telling them as honestly as I have told you this one. And before you go, please leave me a comment. Tell me where in this wide world you are watching from tonight. Tell me about a letter of your own, or a silence you have never understood, or a parent you are only now beginning to see clearly, the way I am only now, at 79 years old, beginning to truly see my mother. I want to thank you, truly, for sitting with an old woman this long, for letting me speak into whatever quiet corner of your evening you have carved out to listen. It means more to me than you can know, to have somewhere to set this story down at last, after carrying it so privately for this past year. My mother taught me, without ever meaning to teach it, that a story kept too long inside one heart alone can grow heavy enough to bend even the strongest back. I do not wish that particular weight on any of you. So, if you are carrying something similar tonight, something folded small and tucked away for someone else's sake, I hope you find, in your own good time and in your own gentle way, the right place and the right person to finally set it down. Thank you for sitting with an old Amish woman and her story tonight. Go gently with the people you love, and go gently with the secrets they may be carrying, for reasons only love could explain. I will see you in the next story, and until then, may you be kept well.